And good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's webinar on Achieving Emotional Wellness. This is part 2 of our 2020 webinar series brought to you by Can Do Multiple Sclerosis, the National MS Society, and the MS Society of Canada. For those of you who are new to Can Do MS, we deliver health and wellness education programs to help families with MS thrive. Please visit the Can Do MS website, which is cando-ms.org, to learn more about Can Do MS's online and nationwide in-person programs. The mission of the National MS Society is to help people affected by MS live their best lives as they stop MS in its tracks, restore what has been lost, and end MS forever. You can explore other societies' programs, services, and resources at nationalmssociety.org. Hopefully you logged on this evening to Adobe Connect and you can see our screen. We hope this is an interactive conversation. We'll have some polling questions. In fact, there are 2 polling questions that are up right now. One is, have you seen a mental health professional since your MS was diagnosed? And the other is, how many times in the past week have you taken time to do something for yourself? And our 2 speakers will speak about those polling questions here in a little bit, but you can go ahead and answer those, and we'll have a couple more throughout the presentation. Also on the screen, you'll see a little box that says Files. That's a pod that contains a PDF copy of tonight's slides, as well as an article written by tonight's speakers. So you can click right on those 2 titles there to download those files as a resource for you. And there's also a Q&A pod, and that's where you can type in questions right on the screen there, and we're going to save about 15 to 20 minutes at the end of the presentation to answer as many questions as we can. And if we don't get to your question tonight, we'll be sure to let you know about other resources that you can submit your questions. Tonight's presentation is being recorded and will be available on the National MS Society's webpage as well as the Can Do MS webpage to view on YouTube as an archive. So if you miss anything tonight, you can always go back and watch the archive recording. If you're joining us on your phone this evening, your phone lines have been muted because we are being recorded. And unfortunately, you can only submit questions online. So again, thank you very much for joining us this evening. With all those housekeeping items out of the way, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our 2 speakers this evening. First, we have Dr. Peggy Crawford, who is a health psychologist and with over 20 years of experience in training and clinical experience working with people living with MS at the Department of Neurology at the University of Cincinnati Medical Center and the MS Center at the Cleveland Clinic. And she has had the opportunity to connect with professionals as well as individuals with MS and their families. These relationships have nourished her passion for working in the field of chronic illness, just as her time in the great state of Maine has nourished her soul. So thank you for joining us this evening, Peggy. And we also have Dr. Jean Simmons. Dr. Simmons is a clinical psychologist and has been in practice at the Cleveland Clinic for over 20 years. She emphasizes mind-body approaches to health and emotional wellness in her work with patients both individually and in wellness group programs. She has a special interest in working with those living with chronic health conditions. Additionally, Dr. Simmons was diagnosed with MS in 1999 and is happy to share her journey in supporting others who are connected with MS. So again, thank you so much to Peggy and Jean for joining us this evening, and I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Peggy and Jean.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, Brian. Jean and I are very excited to be with everyone tonight, and we appreciate everybody tuning in. We also appreciate all the questions that you sent ahead when you registered, and we hope to show you that we incorporated many of those questions into tonight's program. We have some learning objectives with tonight's program, and we're hoping that as a result of the information we present, that you'll be able to describe common challenges to emotional wellness, understand the interrelationships, how symptoms like fatigue, mood, and cognition, which are 3 of the most common invisible symptoms, how they relate to each other and affect each other. You'll learn some go-to strategies for coping effectively with these challenges, and we're hoping to help you recognize stress and mood-related symptoms, when to take action about those symptoms, and how to communicate with your support people about your symptoms and your plan for taking action. So what is emotional wellness? It's an important part of overall health and well-being, and you really can't separate it out from the rest of your well-being. It is awareness of emotions, stressors, and challenges in your life and their impact both on you and on other people in your life. It's about recognizing how you react to stressors, and this can be emotionally, physically, behaviorally. And you can use this recognition and this increased awareness to adapt different ways to respond to stressors more effectively. This is going to include various forms of self-care, relaxation, stress reduction, and connecting more to yourself and to others, as well as pursuing meaningful activities. And if you think about it, if you were with us last month, this is a continuation of our first webinar, which was about resilience and adapting to loss and grief. So I want to take a couple of minutes here just to comment on our first polling questions. So as psychologists, we're very interested and think that there's a real role for mental health for people with chronic conditions. And what we can see is that almost 60% of people said yes, that they had seen a mental health professional since they were diagnosed. Another third said no. And then we've got almost about 10% of people that are either thinking about it or where it's been suggested to them, but they haven't quite made that move yet. And also the polling question about how many times in the past week did you take some time to do something for yourself. What you can see is that we're probably glad to see that, boy, that's almost 70% of people have at least taken some time 2 or 3 times, and for some of you, more than 3 times in the past week. So we're glad to see that you're already doing some self-care. All right, so as Brian said, Jean was diagnosed with MS some years ago, and so for many of you who have been with us for other webinars, you may remember that we often have a case presentation or talk about examples of people with MS. And so tonight, Jean is not only with us as a presenter in a psychology role, but also as a person with MS. So Jean experienced her first symptoms when she was 25, and that was optic neuritis and various sensory symptoms and changes in different parts of her body, and she was diagnosed at age 30, 5 years later. And that was 20 years ago. So Jean has been a person with MS for over 2 decades now. Her primary symptoms have been fatigue, and that's often been associated with mood disturbance and cognitive challenges, along with those ongoing sensory symptoms, and she's had some recurrent episodes of optic neuritis. She's been on disease-modifying treatment since her diagnosis, except during her pregnancies. And over the years, because of her symptoms, she has gradually reduced her work hours to the current 10 hours, which she does over 2 days. And that is not 2 days back to back. There is a day off in between there. So Jean, could you share with us some of your biggest challenges?
Sure. I really struggled with the invisible and unpredictable nature of MS. Especially in the beginning, I didn't know what was what my symptoms meant. Am I having a flare-up? Is it stress? Is it fatigue? And because of the invisible nature of my symptoms, I had to be the judge of all that, and I wasn't entirely comfortable with that. I didn't trust myself to know. Also not knowing when I was going to feel good and whether I'd have enough energy to, follow through on commitments or responsibilities, and even deciding to commit to things was stressful for me. And I didn't realize it before, but I really measured my day by how much I got done and really overvalued productivity, and that doesn't work so well with MS. I knew what I wanted to do or should do, and often fell short, or I'd overdo it and pay for it, which I'm sure a lot of you out there are familiar with. early on, I had a lot of trouble keeping up with work demands because of cognitive fatigue, and that was very stressful and upsetting. I was early in my career. And the conflicting values that I had related to my professional goals and then my health, that was a huge source of stress. And, you know, I didn't know, is it okay to take care of myself and not give everything to work? What is taking care of myself? And am I allowed to reserve energy for fun? I mean, I didn't really know how to balance all that and negotiate that. And I also suffered a lot from irritability and anxiety, which I think for me was largely related to sleep, fatigue and sleep problems. And also talking about and explaining MS to others. Who needs to know what and how much? That was a struggle. So those challenges are pretty common in MS, and there are a number of other ones. In addition to the unpredictability of symptoms, MS itself is unpredictable. So, you know, where's this headed? If I, you know, when I first was diagnosed, I wondered, am I going to get married? Am I going to have kids? And then later I thought, are my kids going to have to take care of me? And of course, now that I'm over 50, I realize most parents do worry about that anyway. There are a lot of losses associated with MS. You can't do things like you used to. Employment can be affected. You may need to make modifications to your work, your schedules, or your career path. You might have to ask for accommodations, and you might even have to leave the workforce before you're ready. Having an illness like MS can really impact your self-esteem and confidence. You may not feel as able or in control, and you just might feel less like yourself. Things can also change for you socially if you feel like you have, you know, restrictions in your activities due to your illness. Often, people also have to give up valued roles and responsibilities. And sometimes I think the process of figuring out what needs to change can be pretty frustrating and painful, and one that can end in a sense of loss even when you make changes that are in the interest of your health. I think people can be pretty hard on themselves and wrestle with shoulds about how to use their energy and when to push. I know I've had a lot of arguments with myself over the years about that. Sorting out symptoms and how to respond to them can be challenging. And, you know, because of the invisible nature of MS, it can be kind of lonely, too. And that statement, oh, but you look so good, that is a reminder that the other person doesn't really know what's going on the inside. And when do you decide to let someone in on it or just take it as a compliment of sorts? So there's really this catch-22, and my arrows, oh, here it is. Okay, there's really this catch-22 when it involves it, and when it comes to MS, because of the invisible symptoms. You might feel good and look normal. You might frequently, you know, be able to kind of pass as normal, and that kind of feels good sometimes. It's hard to describe your symptoms to other people. It's hard for others to understand. Everyone's been tired or exhausted, but that doesn't begin to capture what it's like to have MS fatigue. It's easy for people to also underestimate and minimize your symptoms. And on the other hand, you might have people in your life who worry excessively about your health. If you mostly have invisible symptoms, you can pass as healthy, and that's good to sometimes be able to forget about your illness, especially if you're having a good day. But then when you ignore symptoms, it can get you in trouble. Disclosing your symptoms, your MS to others can be more of a choice when your symptoms are invisible. How do you decide who to tell and how much and under what circumstances? And when someone tells me that you're so lucky that you get to work part-time, do I say, yeah, it's great, I have a great balance, or do I say, well, you know, do I let them in on it? And that's really a choice. So these invisible symptoms can really impact all areas of our life, our roles, our responsibilities, our relationships, and our self-esteem.
So I think, Jean...
Oops, did I do it? Did I double click? I did.
Okay. I think we're good. Okay. I think clearly, Jean, you're talking about how, your primarily invisible symptoms have affected your life. And one of the things that you've done for tonight is to go back and sort of come up with some recollections. And you've been willing to share some of these recollections with us about your MS, particularly how symptoms can interrelate or affect each other and present challenges for you. So this first recollection you've titled, How Mood and Cognition Relate. And to quote you, you said, I was early in my career when first diagnosed, and my difficulties formulating thoughts in meetings and word-finding issues caused me significant anxiety. I was afraid it reflected on my professional competence. And we particularly chose this graphic because I remember you said, this is really kind of how you felt sitting in those meetings. So that's a great example. So what do we know about invisible symptoms? Changes in mood, fatigue, pain, and cognitive function, those are all invisible symptoms, and they occur frequently in people with MS. Just to give you some sense of the numbers, more than 50% of people with MS will experience a major depressive episode. And keep in mind, this is 3 times the number or the percentage that you would find out there in the general population. So it's a significant issue and concern in MS. The rates for anxiety are really quite similar to those for depression. Fatigue occurs in 80% of people with MS. And often if you say to people, what are your top 2 or 3 symptoms, fatigue is invariably going to be part of that short list. So it's the most common symptom. 65% of people experience some cognitive changes, although for many people, they, if they're measured, look pretty minimal, but for many people, they still have an impact on their life. And pain affects at least 50% of people with MS. So these symptoms are interrelated, so that when you experience an increase in the frequency and severity of one, you also experience increase in another. And if you remember what Jean's quote told us just a minute ago, that when she experienced cognitive difficulties at work, she also experienced significant anxiety. And my guess is that as you experienced anxiety, then it felt like the cognitive difficulties sort of were increased as well. So sort of a vicious cycle. So I know that there are ways to manage invisible symptoms, Jean. Could you share some of that with us?
Sure. The good news is there really is a lot that you can do to manage them. And just the first step is just to become more aware of what your symptoms are and what kind of impact they're having on your life. There's so much you can do to reduce the frequency and severity of them and how they affect you. And the even better news is that making an improvement in one area can also impact other areas. So improving sleep, which we're going to talk about later, can lead to improvement in other symptoms. Similarly, getting exercise can deepen sleep. It can improve mood and improve cognition. So once you have an inventory of your symptoms, areas where you are challenged, you can develop go-to strategies that you can rely on to improve your emotional wellness, and they can become a habit, a way of life. All right, I'm a little slow on this. There we go.
Okay, thanks, Jean. So this is another one of Jean's recollections, and again, it shows how symptoms can affect each other along with some go-to strategies in the hope of reducing the negative impact of symptoms. So this is how fatigue impacts mood and coping. So Jean says, parenting young children when irritable and overwhelmed due to MS fatigue was a challenge. Meditation was a lifesaver. I discovered that only 10 minutes of focused, deep breathing before my husband left for work was enough to make a difference and enable me to be more present and respond to my children instead of react. I'd usually realize by 10 a.m. if I had neglected to do it. I'm curious, Jean, can you tell us how you knew if you neglected to do it?
That's a great question. My emotions were always the guide. I would find myself feeling irritable, impatient, and even overwhelmed. And those were the signs. Uh-oh, I did not take the time to do that meditation. So I've been like hop into the bathroom and do some deep breathing and try to begin again, which is always the rule with meditation when you fall off. You just begin again.
Thanks, Jean. That's helpful. I'm just taking a look at this polling question where we were asking people to let us know which of the relaxation and mindfulness activities they'd engaged in so far this month. And the numbers are sort of moving around here, but it looks like we've got some people in really almost every category, a little bit of yoga, a bit more in stretching, deep breathing, meditation, which we're going to talk some more about, as well as deep breathing. So we've got a fair number of people trying a fair number of things, so that's good to see. So moving on to, I think your recollection really is such a great example of why it's so important to pay attention to mood. You know, moods are good and not so good, and that's universal. They're both of those. And this is true for both people with MS and their support partners. So really a lot of what we're talking about tonight, even if you don't have MS, but you are a support partner for somebody who does have MS, all of these things apply to you as well. So changes in mood come in many shapes and sizes. People can feel depressed, anxious. Jean mentioned irritability a minute ago, and that actually is often how we hear people with MS describe their mood, sometimes even more than depressed and anxious. They're irritable. People can experience high levels of tension, and this is both emotional tension and physical tension. And sometimes what we hear people say is, it's really hard to describe. I'm just moody. We also hear that from family members and support partners as well. So people are really paying attention. Part of the reason that it's so important to pay attention to mood is that when people experience these mood states, it really makes everything in life more difficult. So taking care of yourself, taking care of others, which many, many people want to do, functioning well at work and at home, it feels like you've got lead on your feet, kind of, emotionally and sometimes physically as well. And these mood states can negatively affect how you feel about yourself. So people who are depressed and anxious don't feel as, they don't have as much self-confidence, their self-esteem can go down, and it's particularly challenging in relationships. Often when people are in a mood state like anxiety or depression, it's just work to be with other people and to try to communicate. And the other thing is, if you're having trouble with your mood, other people may not really want to spend a lot of time with you. So this is a really important issue. One of the go-to strategies that we recommend to people is that you regularly monitor your mood. This can be really helpful. And you might just pick a time every day, like in the evening when you're deciding on your schedule for the next day, your to-do list, to just also monitor your mood. Some people actually keep track of this in writing. Now people do all kinds of things on their phone. Some of us are still from the old school and we write things down. And I think however you do it, it can really be helpful because you can then go back and look at how your mood varies and what else was going on that day, so you can really start to see patterns. So I know, Jean, that there are times when probably mood is more vulnerable, more at risk. Could you talk with us some about that?
Absolutely. And it is so true, and it's so important to be mindful of these kind of risky times for mood. First of all, people are more likely to suffer shifts in their mood both before and during an exacerbation. And for some, a mood shift without some logical explanation can be an early warning system of sorts of an exacerbation, or it could be a sign that you're overdoing it. You might need to step back and assess, how you're doing and make necessary adjustments. Sometimes the treatment for exacerbations, steroids, can cause mood disturbance. That's not uncommon. A person can be more vulnerable to mood disturbance, mood changes when unable to meet expectations of themselves or perceived expectations of others. Keep in mind that our expectations are often very, very closely linked to our values. So if you feel like you're not measuring up or that you might be disappointing someone or even yourself, that can have a negative impact on your mood. MS-related losses can also result in mood changes, and those losses can include giving up valued roles or positions like we talked about before, just not participating in life the way you used to. I used to love to go see live music and stand at the stage, and now I can only go if I'm guaranteed a spot to sit, if it doesn't start too late in the evening, and if it's not the night before I work. So needless to say, I don't get to hear as much music as I used to. Mood can be negatively impacted when your body just won't cooperate with you, especially after a period of feeling good. I find that when I'm feeling good, I kind of get in this mindset of, I'm just going to keep feeling this way. And there is a letdown when those symptoms start to creep in. And then, other losses, of course, having to leave the workforce before you're ready, that can be really difficult, and your mood can be vulnerable, and people are more at risk for depression or anxiety. And then moods are just susceptible during typical or expected kind of life transitions, even positive ones, like a marriage, a new job, or a child leaving for college. So there are two primary mood states that we are especially concerned about that are particularly common, and those are depression and anxiety. And keep in mind also that many people come to MS already with a history that includes difficulties in their mood and challenges to their functioning, like anxiety and depression, or even other challenges like ADHD, which can impact your mood and your functioning. So, and depression specifically can have multiple causes: neurological, immune dysfunction, life stressors, even medications can cause depression. Symptoms often include a combination of emotional, physical, and cognitive changes. Examples include sadness and worry, sleep disturbance, lack of energy, fatigue, and difficulties focusing or memory problems. And there's a lot of overlap between depression and anxiety, and many people experience both. Depression itself can be life-threatening. People often stop taking care of themselves when they're depressed. They may engage in risky behaviors. They might engage in self-medicating, or maybe they stop taking their medication. And with depression also comes an increased risk of suicide. Mood problems are underdiagnosed and undertreated in large part because they're just not talked about. Providers don't always ask about mood, or people with MS don't initiate because they may not think it's important or relevant to their MS care. And this is also true for our care partners who are not unaffected by MS or life. And the good news is that regardless of the cause, people do respond well to treatment, and there is absolutely no need to suffer. So how do you know when you've moved beyond stress-related mood symptoms to something more serious that needs attention? And how do you decide to take action? When symptoms are interfering with your activities, your functions, and your relationships, especially if you're not enjoying things that you used to. That's really a time to take action and seek help. Also, when your emotions are more in the realm of what Peggy and I consider to be toxic emotions, guilt, shame, resentment, these emotions tend to perpetuate suffering and also are often a sign that people are stuck. These emotions can fuel rumination, which can be present in both depression and anxiety. So if you're replaying the same thoughts over and over again, the conversations, if you're kind of stuck in your head around the past or anticipating future events over and over, that's a time to take action. Also, if your old strategies for coping just don't seem to be working anymore and you just can't snap out of it, if you're feeling hopeless, if you are having thoughts of harming yourself, that's significant, a definite sign pointing to the need to take action. And all of these things, are things to look out for in yourself, but also your significant others, your family members. Don't be afraid to check in with people about their mood, their sense of hope, how they feel they're doing. And it's really okay to ask directly and describe any concerns that you have about your loved ones. Peggy, let me get that slide changed before I forget. Can you talk a little bit about what you should do once you become aware of your symptoms and acknowledge that they're having an impact, and what you can do about it? Where do people start?
Absolutely. I think it's the next step that's so important for people to know that there are options. I think one thing to consider is that certainly it depends to some extent on the severity of your symptoms. So if you're still a bit in the throes of, is this enough to act on? Should I seek treatment? What should I do about this? How severe is this? One thing you can do is you can ask someone you trust, someone you interact with on a regular basis who is able to make lots of observations about you. You can ask them to describe, have they had any concerns about your recent mood and behavior? This is also a great beginning if you go on to treatment, because this person can be a provider of feedback for you after you start treatment. I think certainly if you've decided that you are at the point and you want to seek specific treatment for your mood, you can always talk with someone from your MS care team or your primary care provider. Although they may not have a designated mental health professional or a psychologist like myself or Jean, often people in practice have developed relationships with mental health professionals out in the community, and so they know who is experiencing people with MS and people that they trust. You can also call the National MS Society at this 800 number. You can reach an MS navigator that way, and they have questions that they can ask you that will help to screen your symptoms to get a better sense of, are these significant, how significant, and would it be a good idea to go on to seek some treatment. They can also help you identify mental health professionals in your area. I think that one of the things we certainly want you to keep in mind is that no matter what, you have the right to feel better than you do. And you have the right to take action. So if you're concerned about your mood and how it's affecting you, please tell someone. So let's talk a little bit about the treatment of depression and anxiety. There are several modalities recommended, and often people use these in combination. Certainly, Jean and I as psychologists are somewhat biased that we think psychotherapy and counseling is beneficial. I think it provides people an opportunity to hear what they've been thinking, hear themselves say it out loud, and sometimes you actually hear it in a new way. The other benefit is that you are saying this to somebody who can be objective. This is not somebody you're going to see across from yourself at the dinner table. So they are going to give you feedback. They're going to ask you challenging questions. and of course help you generate options to deal with your symptoms. So we highly recommend it. Often people also take medication, and what's important to know is that antidepressant medications also seem to be very helpful for a lot of anxiety symptoms. So I think for people who have both depression and anxiety, as Jean mentioned, many people do, they get sort of bonus for taking one medication to helping two forms of mood problems. And also exercise. Exercise, we know, just is good for everything. And so this is sort of like a three-legged stool. We would probably recommend that most people consider all three. Also, I think it's important that when you seek treatment, that you share your personal and family history of mood disorders and treatment. So it's important for people to know what has worked for you in the past if you've had previous treatment, but maybe what has worked for people close to you in your family, relatives, sisters, moms, that kind of thing. And one of the points we really want to emphasize is that although support group participation is a wonderful thing to have available, and many people get amazing support, lots of up-to-date information, and just that sense of not being alone, it is not sufficient treatment for treating significant mood changes. So it can be an adjunct, it can be an additional part of your treatment, but not sufficient for treating it. And also self-medicating with substances such as food, alcohol, drugs is not a substitute for treatment. So one of the things that we know is that many people find it difficult to talk about mood, in part because of the continued stigma about mental health. Why is it so important to make the effort to talk about mood, Jean?
Well, depression and anxiety, keep in mind they are invisible symptoms, and they can therefore be isolating. And the nature of the illness themselves, it can lead to isolation. So talking to other people, first of all, can help you feel more connected to people and less alone. You can be a role model for others by opening up and reducing the stigma that goes with depression and anxiety. And it sends a clear message also that you are aware of your symptoms, that, you're aware of the severity and the impact. It also opens you up to support, and in turn, people are also more likely to be understanding. It may also give you the opportunity to support someone else in opening up about what's going on with you. You might find that suddenly the person you're talking to is confiding in you about what's going on for them, so then support can become more mutual, and you are less alone. So, Peggy, can you give an example of a situation where someone found it really beneficial to talk about their mood and the cascading effect that had?
Absolutely. And this is one of my all-time favorite examples. Oh, wait, I think I had already, okay, that's okay. We're back on track. Whoop, okay.
Hands off.
Hands off, okay. Okay. I think we are back to where we want to be. So as I was saying, this is one of my favorite examples of somebody who came for treatment and talked to other people about it and was thus able to care for those other people. So this is a woman, mid-30s, who was referred to me for depression. She was married, she had 3 daughters, she had recently been diagnosed with MS, and she had primarily invisible symptoms. And her diagnosis of MS and being referred to a psychologist, she said it really made her aware that she had been depressed for some time, but this was somewhat worse since her MS. And that one of the things that was now occurring was that she was just feeling so guilty about her parenting skills and how she was behaving with her children. So she came in for an evaluation. Treatment recommendations included therapy and medication, and she did share with her husband and her daughters that she wasn't feeling good about her mood, and she certainly wasn't feeling good about her behavior, and she had decided to do something about it by talking to somebody. And so after a few sessions, she arrived at my office with a sealed envelope that was, she said, sent to me by her daughters, and it was to remain unopened. So after a couple of minutes of deciding what should we do with this envelope, she said she was a little bit scared because she wasn't sure what they had written in here, what was in there. So we decided to open it, and when I read it out loud, part of what the note said was, please don't stop talking to our mother. She hasn't called us any bad names since coming to see you. And I became very tearful in reading this note, and when I looked up, this woman was tearful, and then all of a sudden she started laughing, and she said, you know, my 3 girls haven't collaborated on anything for years. So she said, I'm really happy they collaborated on this. And so I think one of the great things about this was sort of all the things that Jean was just emphasizing, but that she now had this ongoing feedback and clearly knew that what she was doing was making a real difference to the people in her family who she loved dearly. So one of the focuses of therapy for this woman was her stress, which is often the case because many people, when they are stressed, often notice that it sort of heightens their MS symptoms. So we always want to do something about stress levels. So managing stress effectively is an important component in the treatment of depression and anxiety, but also in preventing recurrences, which clearly is a goal. And what we find is that the regular practice of relaxation strategies such as deep breathing and meditation really have all of the following goals: to reduce tension and anxiety, to increase self-awareness, which is really important about how stress is affecting you cognitively and physically and emotionally, and then also to help you decrease your reactivity to stress. What this awareness then does is that you can generate alternative responses to recurring stressors. And I can tell you that over the years, the biggest recurring stressor that most people reported was people, other people. So that people are stressful. And clearly a part of managing stress is making healthy lifestyle a priority. So sleeping, eating regularly, getting exercise, spending time with people that you enjoy, pursuing activities that you enjoy, that's all important parts of stress management. You know, one source of stress for people with MS, but also for other people in their lives, so for support partners, is just trying to sort out what is MS, what is me. And so this is another recollection that Jean shared. And what she said is, because I struggled so much with productivity, I had a lot of negative self-talk about my lack of motivation, organization, and laziness. Eventually, I became aware that my fluctuating effort was also related to my fatigue. So I had to develop strategies for that. So earlier, you know, we talked about that fatigue is probably one of the most common symptoms in MS. And so, Jean, could you tell us a bit about how people usually cope with fatigue?
Well, I think I've had a lot of experience with what doesn't work. It's a pattern that I've seen in myself as someone with MS and also in my patients who have MS or other chronic health conditions. So it's easy to lose the battle with fatigue by acting like you don't have MS, that there's nothing wrong. This can include not paying attention to how you're feeling, minimizing your symptoms or ignoring early warning signs that you may be overdoing it, pushing through. My MO for so long was running on fumes. It's tempting to do as much as you can just in case while you're feeling good, or maybe you're just squeezing in one more thing and ignore the cost of overdoing it. Also, doing for others and in your household or for work and putting yourself last is also a common way of behaving. I've had a lot of patients come to me with no idea of what it means to take care of themselves and the importance of doing that, and, you know, in the interest of your health or your family. And once in treatment, often people minimize the need or their right to even be there, you know, saying others have it worse or I'm wasting your time. Persisting in doing things like you always did them and not making room for MS is a sure way of losing a battle with fatigue. I also think that many people realize that even before MS, perhaps they weren't good at taking care of themselves, they weren't very good at self-care, and had already been ignoring some consequences of doing so. And I think MS tends to bring it all to a head. Finally, equating asking for help as a weakness and making changes with giving in. I used to be so stubborn at a local grocery store when asked if I needed help taking my groceries to the car, and this was a place where they have people to do that. You're not allowed to tip. This is just what they do, and I'd always say, oh, no, I got it. And my thinking was that if I can do it, I should do it, rather than thinking of it as energy conservation, especially when low on fuel. And I think, you know, people considering whether or not to get handicapped parking, you know, they might think similarly. You might be able to walk into a store with no problem, but how are you going to feel after shopping is done? And the impact may not be visible to others, but it's certainly felt by you. So before we move on to talk more about fatigue management, let's take a look at, we've got some polling questions about asking for help. And wow, almost 83+% of people find it difficult to ask for help. All right, so let's look at some of the reasons why, well, you know, what gets in the way of asking for help. And our top reason is not wanting to feel dependent. And what are some others? Pride comes in at 31%. Just about 30% people won't do the things the way I want them to do. And one of our, you know, one of our coping strategies for fatigue management happens to be adjusting standards. And then there's, you know, the fear that people will say no and won't do what they've agreed to. I mean, a good 10% feel that way. But then there's the very honest answer of, honestly, I don't know what I need. And becoming just more aware of yourself is really what our program is about today. It's just paying attention to yourself and figuring out what it is you need, because you're the only one that can figure that out. So, Peggy, do you have anything to say about the polling questions here?
I'm really struck with the not wanting to feel dependent, and often we hear that, but I mean, it's really the majority of people are responding to that. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. I can relate.
I'm sure.
All right. Wow. But yeah, that's an impressive number there. All right. Well, let's go ahead and talk about what to do about fatigue management. A lot of my go-to strategies really have to do with energy conservation and just choosing wisely about how I'm going to use my energy. When Peggy asked me about doing this talk tonight, I really had to think about it. I mean, it is rather close to my bedtime, for one. It's my typical wind-down period, and when my brain is not exactly at its best. And it's also the night before work, and then I also knew we were going to be putting in some, you know, time preparing, so I just wasn't sure about it. But once Peggy and I started talking, we got so excited about it, and I was excited about the challenge of doing something new. I've not done this before, and then just having fun with Peggy. So, you know, I quickly realized that this is one of those situations where pushing, using extra energy was going to be worth it because of the excitement and challenge. And I might have a little trouble winding down tonight, but I'm going to bounce back and be so glad that I did this. But on the other hand, there are many things that I say no to. And, I don't go to PTO meetings, for example. I volunteer in small ways during the school year, but, I've gotten pretty good at saying no. I have to protect my energy resources. And I did change the slide, sorry. When making to-do lists, I really try to prioritize things, and I do include self-care, exercise, always makes the list. Some items may be time sensitive, and others can get bumped to another day if I run out of time or energy. I have mornings when I move slowly and don't schedule anything until later in the day. I'm always listening to my body. When running errands, sometimes that means combining errands and so that I, limit my driving time. Other times it means spreading errands out over several days, and I'll write them in my calendar according to when it makes most sense, energy-wise, schedule-wise. I try to sit when possible, like if I'm chopping a bunch of vegetables or if I'm socializing at a gathering. I often ask my husband, please remind me to sit down if you see that I've been standing a long time talking to someone. I also break up tasks into manageable steps. My Thanksgiving recipes, for example, all have steps that start a day or two beforehand. So I break it up, and I try to do the shopping like the weekend before. So I spread it all out. At the pet store, I've gotten a lot more comfortable asking for people to carry, to load my car with the 40-pound bags of kitty litter. I delegate and share responsibilities at home as much as possible. My husband and I are a pretty good team when it comes to taking care of the house and the kids. I do sometimes catch myself assuming that I'm going to be doing something, and then I realize, wait a minute, this is something my husband can help out with. But some of it, there's this automatic do, and you kind of get caught up in that and stop paying attention. Although we haven't been good about this, I would say teaching your children to do chores to take a load off, and it's also good for their development, so it's a win-win. I am trying to have my kids do more, especially since one's about to go off to college. And as I mentioned before, adjusting your standards can be very powerful and liberating. So, for example, it's much more important to take my dog to the park than to clean my house. So I'm, making choices that are going to serve me well. And how can I not mention sleep? I don't think it made the slide, but we're talking about fatigue management. It's so important it's going to have its own slides. Getting adequate sleep, making it a priority, and doing everything I can to improve sleep is a huge part of my fatigue management.
So I think, Jean, this is one of those situations where you gave us a recollection, and this is related to sleep. Talking about a vicious cycle, you say, I had years of insomnia due to concerns about my performance and over-focus on getting enough sleep. Some of it came with the territory of having young kids and interrupted sleep, but a lot was due to my sleep habits, negative thoughts, and anxiety. So, we really could not go without talking about sleep because it's a huge part of self-care. And if you look at the items on this slide, it's really everything that comes under the category of sleep hygiene. And we just want to call your attention to a couple of these bullets. So one is the fourth one down, practice a good wind-down routine. So it's really important that somewhere relatively early in the evening, I know this is often very difficult, particularly for people who work, but to have some time to sort of think about what you want to put on your to-do list or consider it your worry time, but that not be smack up against your bedtime. And the other thing we really want you to look at is avoiding caffeine, smoking, alcohol, but screen time before bed. And so this is TV, phone, computers, and these are definitely screens. These should not be brought into the bedroom. So one of the things, too, that is a chronic stressor for people is communication. And are there some go-to strategies that you could share with us about communication in general?
Sure. I think the first thing is just to make it a priority. It's important in relationships, but especially when navigating MS. Having regular check-ins when everyone's paying attention, just to kind of, check in about what's going on, anticipate kind of roadblocks, strategies to deal with them. I find that it's helpful to check in during times of stress so that everyone can kind of step back and recognize what's going on and how they're doing. In our household, we all tend to get irritable when we're under stress, so if we step back and acknowledge the real stressors that are going on, then we're less likely to personalize, each other's moods. Respecting that people have different communication styles. I try to tone my language down in terms of how much emotion is expressed, because my husband just does a lot better with just information and facts. So I try to tone things down a little bit, and that helps him listen. And, some people want to fix things and move quickly to solutions when sometimes, we're just seeking support. So, common refrain from patients is, I just want my partner to listen. And it can be helpful to just give someone a heads up, hey, I'm not looking for solutions right now. I just want to share something with you. Some people aren't really comfortable with, negative with emotions or suffering, and it's really good to know who in your life is good for what. Some friends or family members are great listeners and others are great problem solvers, so you don't have to be both necessarily. Also being a good listener, and we want to hear from our care partners. It's good for their emotional health too. Let's see, not expecting people to read your mind and being aware of your own mind reading that occurs can help avoid misunderstandings or jumping to conclusions. I know when my spouse says, I'm confused, it means I need to pause and back up that there's been a misunderstanding or I haven't communicated something clearly. One of the most important things I've learned as someone with MS and as a therapist is that people do not have to completely understand what it's like for you. It doesn't mean they don't care, or they won't honor your needs if they're communicated effectively. And I think another thing is it's really important to let go of any idea that you have that people should know how you feel or should know what you need. It's a common misconception about relationships that I've run into a lot in my practice. And, it contributes to a lot of relationship tension, frustration, and suffering. So just it gets back to knowing yourself, knowing what you need, and communicating that effectively and regularly. And along with that is you really need to remember, that you're the expert. It's really okay to keep things simple, especially when you're talking about your boundaries and your needs, being matter-of-fact about having a chronic illness and your decisions about what you do and how you spend your time. People don't have to know how you feel to respect your self-care needs. And a strategy I like to use a lot is, if someone asks you to do something before you commit, ask for more information. Take time to decide. Let me think about it. I'll get back to you. So, but again, I think kind of less is more sometimes with communication. People don't need to know all the symptoms I'm having. Sometimes I just say, I'm moving slowly today, or I'll say to my husband, I'm feeling messy today. That seems to be enough, I think I used to struggle a lot with wanting people to understand and validate me, and I think that chasing that really led to some unnecessary struggle and suffering. So, wow, have we about wrapped up? Gosh, we're getting close. So, Peggy, we've talked about a number of challenges in MS, especially pertaining to invisible symptoms and go-to strategies for coping and reducing their impact. Can you just give us a quick summary of some resources and give our listeners an idea of how to get started should they decide they want to seek outside professional support?
Absolutely, and I think, we started here on this resources for dealing with challenges slide with personal resources because I want you all to really think about the reality that you are a person with life experiences and competencies and abilities before you were diagnosed with MS. And all of those didn't go away the day that you were diagnosed. Some of the most courageous people I know in my life have MS, and these are people who, in spite of fears, will acknowledge problems, ask for help. These are, resilience, being able to bounce back, as we talked about in last month's webinar. And I think that putting emphasis on good self-care, we can't really stress that enough. Being flexible, not just in your body. Stretching isn't just for muscles. Stretching is for the mind as well. And being willing to try new things and nurture your creativity with new activities, sort of branch out. Certainly other people in your life. We've talked a lot tonight about asking for help and how to go about that. I think one of the things that's particularly helpful is just being really clear about what you need, and then also giving people feedback and being appreciative for the help that you've been given. Also, obviously, professionals like Jean and myself, and we have written an article, and this is the link to that article, and it is full of information about how to find a mental health professional, what's involved in the therapy process, what your job is in therapy, what you're likely to experience in therapy, and there are lots of specific resources at the end of that article. So just a couple of words about some relaxation strategies. Jean and I particularly like relaxation strategies that are based on breathing and meditation for the most part is based on breathing as well. And these are portable strategies, so if you're with yourself, you have everything you need to do breathing exercises and meditation. And meditation isn't meant to clear your mind and think about nothing. It's really meant to focus on your breath. And so we've given you some examples here and how to get started. And I think we encourage people to start small and build up. And it's amazing what one or two slow, deep breaths and doing it in a mindful way, so focusing just on the breathing, what that can do for you. So start your practice sessions. Also, we have some additional resources. There are a number of can-do webinars that are related to what we've talked about tonight. I particularly draw your attention to flying solo with multiple sclerosis, because we know that not everybody has a primary support partner and that people may need to come up with different combinations of go-to strategies for their emotional wellness. Jean and I have a couple of favorite books which we've recommended here that are related to stress and health. And also, Jean's identified for us some podcasts on the relaxation program through the Cleveland Clinic where she is practicing. So we hope that this has been of benefit to you tonight. And Brian, do we have a few questions that we can answer for people?
We do. First of all, thank you so much, Peggy and Jean, for sharing your years of experience of working with people with MS, and Jean especially sharing your experiences living with MS and being so open about it. We appreciate your time as well as all of our viewers tuning in. Before we get to some questions and answers, and again, in that Q&A box, you can continue to submit questions. We received a lot tonight. If you click that February 2020 webinar, you'll get a PDF copy, and you can click right on those hyperlinks to access those webinars. So that will be available to you on the PDF. Also, just so you guys know, when we close out this evening, will be a survey that will pop up on your screen. We really appreciate you taking some time to thinking about some feedback about this webinar, what you enjoyed, what you wish we had discussed, was it effective, and letting us know your feedback from tonight. So now as we're getting some more questions coming in, the first question we received, we just talked about meditation, and we got a lot of comments from viewers that meditation can often be intimidating, or they feel like they're not doing it right. They're trying to clear their head, and all of a sudden their head is full of thinking about trying to clear their head. So do you have any sort of tips or suggestions on how to do meditation to its fullest?
Yeah, I just want to make a comment about that, because I think what you're describing is just so incredibly common. And I do think that people have this misconception that meditation is trying to force yourself to clear every possible thought from your mind. And as one man came back to me and said, I don't know how you expect me to think about nothing. I'm always thinking about something. So I think the idea is this is where the focus on the breath is really important. So when your mind does drift to some other thought other than your breath, I think the secret is to say gently to yourself, it's okay. I don't have to think about that right now. I can think about that later. This is actually what I say to myself. So, I'm an example of a daily meditator. So I think that, being gentle with myself and not being critical and not sort of getting down on myself that I'm not doing it well. And some days I have my mind drift off more than usual. But I think the key is really come back to the breath and the focus on how the breath feels or how the breath sounds, something about the breath. And I think over time it really can, you can get better at it. Jean, do you have some additional thoughts?
Sure. What I always say to patients is the most important part of meditation is returning to the moment. And it's that return which is strengthening your brain's ability to come back to the moment. So that's really what the practice is. It's not about controlling your thoughts. It's about relating to them in a different way so that ultimately when your mind wanders in unproductive ways, you can come back. So that's the most important part is the return to the moment when you notice your mind has wandered, which it's going to do. The other thing I'll also say is that it is a practice. Even people who have been meditating for 20, 30, 50 years, they still call it a practice.
Right.
Well, thank you for sharing some more information about that tool to really control our stress and help with our emotional well-being. So that's wonderful. We also spoke a little bit about support partners, and we do have a lot of spouses and parents and children of people with MS on the webinar this evening. Can you talk a little bit more about how we make sure that those support partners receive the emotional support that they need?
That's a really good question, and I think that, first of all, I think it's really essential that support partners let people know that they're in need of support. Often when I go to programs and get together with support partners, they feel that they can't talk about having emotional needs because of the person with MS in their life. And sometimes they don't pursue their own emotional wellness. They don't do things outside the home. They don't continue to socialize with friends. They give everything up and just stay home when they get home from work. So I think also to really think about what I said earlier, and that is that, everyone, not just the person with MS, has a right to feel better than they do. And so I think the first step really is acknowledging to someone that emotionally you have needs that are not being met, and to really talk about what could be done. And this the need may be met by talking with the person with MS, but I think sometimes allowing yourself to get some assistance and professional help. It's certainly not been unusual over the years that I haven't seen the person with MS, I've actually seen their support partner because they're the person who is most feeling the need or most feeling distressed. What are your thoughts about that, Jane?
Yeah, I mean, being a caregiver is very stressful, and I think often people who do not have MS or don't have health issues sometimes feel a little guilty about that and don't feel comfortable, saying that they're having issues themselves or they're suffering in any way. And I think just really encouraging everyone in your family to talk about stress, how life is affecting you. My stress happens to be, often MS related, but my family members have very valid stressors also that they need to talk about, get support around, and just having that kind of attitude, I think, can be really helpful.
I think even having sort of, we talked about monitoring your own mood on a regular basis, but I know in some families they sort of have almost an emotional check-in so that they sort of talk about, so, how are you doing? I remember a system that a woman had where she put up different colored Post-its depending on what her mood was for the day. So it was a way of communicating to her family. But I think just really to emphasize what Jean is saying, to sort of normalize the talking about emotions and mood. I think the other thing is that in response to this need of support partners and family members and people who care about somebody with MS, there are now support groups that are specifically focused on family members or support partners. And so I think that the need is certainly being more recognized. But again, tell somebody, talk about it.
And on the opposite end of the spectrum, we received a question of what are some strategies to maintaining emotional wellness when you don't have family or don't have a support network, and especially if you're homebound and isolated? Can you talk a little bit about the particular emotional impacts of kind of flying solo and what some strategies may be around that?
Yeah, I think that having, I remember facilitating a support group that was a phone support group down in Massachusetts when I was living down there for a while. And so I think finding out, reaching out to the MS Society, for example, calling the navigators on that 800 number and finding out what sorts of supports are available that wouldn't require you to leave home. But I know that there are people who stay in touch with each other by phone, by email, but also thinking about what activities you're interested in. Sometimes having people come to you to socialize or to spend time with you. You don't always have to leave your home, but I think letting people know that you'd like to spend time with them or you want to participate in some community activity, maybe from afar, but by helping to make plans, by making phone calls, a little bit what Jean was talking about earlier. What do you think, Jean?
Yeah, and I think more and more, with the internet, people are taking advantage of a lot of more, virtual kind of support, chat groups and so forth.
That's great.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I think we have time for one more question as we're starting to get a little late, especially for those on the East Coast. Thanks for staying up with us. We've had a couple people that noticed that their emotional roller coasters were linked to their loss of mobility or loss of physical capabilities. Is there a link between the two often, and what are some strategies maybe to cope with those?
It sounds like the question is there sort of a physiological connection to the roller coaster? I'm not sure about that. Do you have some data on that, Jean, or?
No, I don't, and I'm just thinking more from an adjustment standpoint, but
right.
I know about it physiologically. I mean, of course, if you're moving around less, you do get more pent-up stuff. There's less that you can release, so, that's one possible physiological thing going on there. I don't know.
I do think that, again, probably because we really truly feel that talking about things can make such a difference. I think for somebody to pay attention to the patterns that feel like roller coasters, so what's associated with the better mood, the worse mood. I think sometimes we've even had people journal for a couple of weeks or something to look at their mood, what else is going on that day. And I think it's certainly not unusual that if you've confronted a situation where you're reminded of something that you can no longer do, that is very likely to have an impact on your mood. I don't think you'd be human if it didn't. But I think really sort of trying to identify those patterns and talking it out with somebody to see if you can head things off would be really helpful.
Well, those are all really great points and great strategies. And again, thank you, Jean and Peggy, so much for taking your time to share your thoughts with us. And we hope you all found it beneficial and enjoyable this evening. I do want to let you know about a few other resources that are out there. Hopefully, you can continue your path with Can Do MS. We have a number of different in-person and online programs. Now that you've registered for the webinar series, you're signed up for the whole year. So the second Tuesday of every month, we bring a different topic, and it's sequential. So next month we're going to be talking about cognitive wellness, and then really trying to cover the whole gamut of living our best lives possible with MS. I also do want to point out that we have Ask the Can Do team. So if we didn't get to your question this evening, you can submit a question online, and we'll pass it off to one of our awesome programs consultants to try to get you an answer to those questions. We also do have impactful in-person programs. So go to cando-ms.org to see if we're coming to your town soon, and hopefully we'll see you at an in-person or an online program. In addition, we work closely with the National MS Society, and they have some wonderful resources at nationalmssociety.org, including their MS Navigator program that can get you connected to local resources and professionals that can help you along your journey. In addition, there's MS Path to Care, which is a project brought to you by Can Do MS that provides dynamic roadmaps to those living with MS and offer ways of partnering with your healthcare team, utilizing support networks, and caring for all aspects of your wellness. And we're adding a new section on emotional and mental health. So please visit mspaththecare.com. If you enjoyed this evening's presentation, we can only put these on and make them free through the donations of participants. So you'll be able to click right on those links if you would like to pay it forward and make sure we can continue to provide free programs. There's also other ways to get involved with Can Do MS, including Kick MS, which is our peer-to-peer fundraising platform. It's a great way to get friends and family involved with providing more free programs and resources for people living with MS like yourself. So again, please join us next month. It will be Tuesday, March 10th, and that will be on achieving cognitive wellness. So we hope you enjoyed tonight's presentation on emotional wellness. And again, thank you so much to Jean and Peggy. Any closing comments to our audience this evening?
I just want to express appreciation for everybody tuning in tonight and participating, and we had a wonderful time preparing this for you.
It's been a lot of fun. Thank you.
All right. Thank you both so much, and thank you everyone for joining, and thank you for filling out the survey that's going to pop up on your screen right now. Have a good night, and we will see you next time. Thank you.